I was wondering if you could address that aspect of our culture and the anti-intellectualism that seems to be now not only ubiquitous, but a kind of an ongoing comedy routine, which has now played itself into the political arena.
Well, in my last week's interview with three film critics, another fellow who's on my website's E-list, Alex Sherman, was talking with some of these other film critics and he talked about how mediocrity is the way society is heading towards. And for an individual to be mediocre is not a good thing. But what he was meaning was really, I think, mediation, in that we have a society that I think slowly but surely, and I'll be an optimist, I think if you went back in 25-year chunks and you look back over the last 500 years, I think you see a slow but steady and undeniable improvement of the human condition. Yes, we have global warming. Yes, we've had world wars. Yes, we had slavery. Yes, we had genocides here, there, and everywhere about things. But Steven Pinker had written a book a couple of years ago about how violence in the human condition has gone down. He's absolutely right. When I was a kid in the 1960s and 70s, that was the single most violent time in New York City history and in the U.S. history. Now it's a cakewalk. I mean, I lived in a neighborhood where if I didn't see someone or hear that someone was murdered, or walk down an alley with my friends and see a dead hand sticking out from a garbage can, that would have been a dull month. And I'm not joking. I grew up in a very mafia infested area as a kid, so this kind of stuff I'd see all the time. I think human beings as a whole, I think society. I'm against political correctness because I don't like to see people stifled. Yes, I don't want people going around, calling people niggers or calling people fags or calling people, or believing in, say, Jewish banker conspiracies or nonsense like that. On the other hand, there are different ways to do that without impinging upon people's own personal freedoms. When someone says something wrong or stupid, you debunk it. You don't silence them, because all that does is foster resentment. And I think as society has gone forward, we just, in the year that we're recording this, 2015, gay rights has produced a triumph of allowing gay marriage, and I think that was a great example in just a decade. I thought in 2005, when this first became a big issue, it was going to take at least 25 years. It only took a decade, and that's because the lawyers there did a brilliant job of slowly but surely knocking out the cultural stilts underneath the opposition in many states, to the point that it became an inevitability. But I think that there are things like workers' rights, the day-to-day things that we still lag in. But I think that the mediation of society is a good thing. We need to have less super rich people. We need to have less poor people and go towards the middle. There will always be the richest people. There will always be the poorest people. But as long as the richest people are not, frolicking over the bones of the dead people or stepping on them, there's nothing particularly wrong with that. The problem has always been about distribution and getting a fair share for most people. I myself, I don't need to be a millionaire. I don't, if I won a lottery ticket and won $5 million and me and my wife could buy a little home and move up to the West Texas mountains or something, I'd do that. I'd be like Robinson Jeffers, get me the hell away from people. But I don't need that. I don't need that. I'm content if I could make $40,000 or $50,000 a year, my wife and I combined, and be able to take a nice vacation once or twice a year and be able to spend all my time on creative thoughts, reaching more people. That would be great. But society does not value those things. Society always thinks short term. This gets back to corporations. Corporations are by their nature short-term creatures. They think only a week, a month, a quarter ahead of the time at the most. They don't think long term, and this feeds into what I call sort of the inner simian of us. When we evolved, our ancestors evolved, deception and lie was a good thing, because if there were 100 nuts or 100 beetles or whatever that my tribe had dug up and had, and if I could secret away 3 extra bugs or 3 extra nuts, my deception, my little theft, and no one knew about it, I'd have more. I would have a greater chance of living. My genes would get spread on, and so that has been inculcated into us. Just as we have the reptilian urge towards violence, we have sort of this primitive simian urge to deceive one another because in evolution it worked. The problem is society has advanced more quickly than our own natal uh, uh, natal social mechanisms, or rather, just as for example, I'll give you an example: obesity, for example. We have more quickly evolved the way to have an excess of food than our bodies have been able to evolve to deal with the excess of food and build up quicker, faster metabolisms to get rid of everything. In the same way, as a society, we have got plenty. We have developed systems and laws that theoretically protect everyone. Whether, if you were going in a lawsuit against Bill Gates, for example, and let's say you had the upper hand and you had the right position, theoretically, you should be able to win. But in reality, of course, Bill Gates is going to be able to hire lawyers, and he can employ subterfuge, and he can dig up some long ago thing. Maybe you had a parking ticket, or maybe you were arrested when you were 15 for being drunk or something when you were underage, and bring that up and use that as a way to win a kind of lawsuit. And so we don't have in our society a way to properly deal with our worst human instincts. Individuals have to do it by themselves. Like I said, I grew up in a very violent area. My natural instinct, perhaps it's natural or maybe it's learned, was that when if there's danger, you have to run or you have to hide. You have to fight back and stand up for yourself. Um, I think it's a good thing that people don't necessarily have to do that. It's good that we don't have to live like Neanderthals. We don't have to live like our ancestors in that kill or be killed Hobbesian type world. But there is the disconnect in that our technology, our our intellectual uh, our intellectual means have run far ahead of our uh, personal, our ethical concerns. The best example is probably eugenics. People always decry eugenics. Eugenics is actually a good thing. It's about genetically modifying humans or anything to make it better. Now, in the hands 100 years ago of dim-witted racists who wanted, or whether they were Nazis or whether they were here in the U.S. or in the Soviet Union too, these people who wanted to modify and make super soldiers and make this, have an all-Aryan race or whatnot. Of course, that becomes nonsense. But eugenics itself isn't bad. It's just that the human beings that were employing it were not the best of the best. They had their own flaws and faults that they could not get out of. And I think society. I'm optimistic. Like I said earlier, we have global warming, but I don't think we have the desire to kill ourselves, to end ourselves as a species. I don't think we have right now the technology, and I think that if we survive until the second half of this century, I think we're gonna go out and explore the universe. I think I don't have any children. I'm talking metaphorically, that my and your descendants are going to live better lives than you and I have and can even think of. There will be things that they will be doing that you and I are not even going to know, because if you look back 50 years ago, and look back at when I was a kid, the old auditorium films of the city of the future. In the future, mankind will be living on Venus, blah blah blah. If you look at some of those, are so ridiculous, and they had no idea, for example, that the internet. They thought we'd be flying around in Jetsons like space cars. They had no idea about the internet. We don't have Jetsons like space cars. We may in 100 years, but they had no idea about the internet. And that's a good example. Information technology, the way to spread ideas, has evolved immensely. Look at these young kids that all have their iPhones, their cell phones. Whenever I've gone in the last 2 or 3 years to a doctor's office or a dentist's office, I'm the only person just sitting there and just sort of relaxing in the chair. Everyone else in the room, they have their cell phones and they're looking at something. I remember Jessica and I went to a restaurant two and a half years ago, and a couple sitting in a booth across from us was sitting at a table, not talking to each other. They were both literally on their cell phones independently. The waiter would come take their order. They didn't speak to each other. Uh, so you have the technology, and that's a good example. The technology that we have to connect each other has driven people apart. Yes, you and I, Susie, could argue on a political blog or a sports blog or a science blog or a Star Trek wiki site or something about this, that, or the other thing. And we're connected in the sense that we're replying to each other. But there isn't the communication, for example, that you and I are having right now. There isn't the exchange of ideas. And that's one of the things that I think uh, is the next sort of frontier. It may take another 20 or 30 years, but I think when people look back at, say, this early internet era, I think Cosmoetica will stand out because it's one of there probably are a few other sites. I can't know about everything out there, but it's one of the few sites that I know of that's even trying to do something of depth. I think that if you were to come back in 50 years in 2065, you or your descendants and look back at all of the stuff and have cyber archaeologists look at all the crap online now, they'd be like, who cares? Oh, Bruce Jenner wore a dress. He killed someone. He's going to jail. Oh, this was a big hubbub then. Who cares? But they will look back and look at this conversation. They'll look at some of the other conversations. They'll look at something I wrote about a film by maybe some foreign filmmaker, and they'll say, "Oh, I understand that. That was a very prescient comment here. Why was this Schneider guy the only person who made that point that we can find online?" And so I do think that quality does win out in the end, and I think history has borne that out. If that was not true, we would not know about the John Donnes. We would not know about the great classical Chinese poets. We would not know about the great philosophers of the classical West. And so I am ultimately optimistic